It is a common drug used to prevent malaria. You might have taken it before traveling overseas if you were trying not to get malaria. But most likely you never heard of this drug until last month, when primetime Fox News hosts and then the president started incessantly promoting it on a daily, sometimes hourly basis as what they were quite sure was a miracle cure for coronavirus. There's no big deal for this coronavirus thing. We've got a cure already. They promoted it despite zero clinical trials and next to no evidence of its effectiveness. But boy, were they insistent.
What if there's already a cheap and widely available medication that's on the market to treat the virus?
Chloroquine, that's a cheap anti-malaria drug, may be effective in treating coronavirus.
Chloroquine.
Hydroxychloroquine. Based on what I see, it could be a game changer. Hydroxychloroquine, it showed very encouraging early results, really encouraging.
Early signs are, for me, reading medical research, I was impressed.
It's very effective. It's a strong drug. I feel good about it. That's all it is, just a feeling.
It has shown surprising promise for treatment of coronavirus.
Hydroxychloroquine.
I've been telling you for a week about hydroxychloroquine.
Hydroxychloroquine.
Hydrochloroquine.
We're talking about hydroxychloroquine.
It is cheap. It's considered safe. So in a lot of ways, hydroxychloroquine is the ideal medicine.
Hydroxychloroquine is a very powerful drug.
Would you try hydroxychloroquine? Because after all I've read, I would.
I got the very early approval from the FDA.
You'd never heard of hydroxychloroquine before we mentioned it.
Hydroxychloroquine, I don't know. It's looking like it's having some good results.
Drum roll, please. Hydroxychloroquine.
What do you have to lose? Take it. There are signs that it works on this, some very strong signs.
There's mounting evidence tonight that hydroxychloroquine may work.
Hydroxychloroquine is now looking more and more like an important tool in treating this virus.
Our national stockpile is now equipped with nearly 30 million hydroxychloroquine pills.
Hydroxychloroquine is credited with saving lives.
A friend of mine told me he got better because of the use of that drug.
Hydroxychloroquine seems to be working. I don't know medicine from cosmology, all right? But the fact of the matter is it's working.
I actually haven't heard a bad story, you want to know the truth. You know, normally you'd hear some good ones, some bad ones, and you'd still give it a shot. I haven't heard a bad story.
Beginning in the middle of March, hydroxychloroquine was mentioned hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times on the Fox News channel, particularly by its primetime hosts, and by the president from the White House podium. Until about a week ago, when those mentions by Fox News and by the president just dropped off a cliff. They just stopped bringing it up. And we don't know why that is. But yesterday, we did get the results of a new study, which has yet to be peer-reviewed, but is the largest to date involving the use of hydroxychloroquine among 368 veterans in veterans hospitals across the U.S. In that trial, the drug was found to have no benefit. And there were actually more deaths reported among those who were given that drug than those who were given standard care. The authors of the study said, quote, "These findings highlight the importance of awaiting the results of ongoing prospective randomized controlled studies before widespread adoption of these drugs." Yeah, you think? When the president was asked about that study last night, he said, quote, "I don't know of the report. Obviously, there have been some very good reports, and perhaps this one is not a good report." The National Institutes of Health panel has also now weighed in on hydroxychloroquine, saying there was, quote, "insufficient clinical data to recommend either for or against it." Then late today, the New York Times was first to report that a high-ranking doctor who led the HHS efforts to try to develop a coronavirus vaccine, he was transferred out of that position this week and demoted after he internally questioned the president's advocacy of that drug. Dr. Rick Bright tells the Times, quote, "I believe this transfer was in response to my insistence that the government invest the billions of dollars allocated by Congress into safe and scientifically vetted solutions and not in drugs that lack scientific merit." He continued, quote, "Specifically, and contrary to misguided directives, I limited the broad use of chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine promoted by the administration as a panacea, but which clearly lack scientific merit." That doctor is now no longer in charge of the search for a vaccine to save us from the deadly coronavirus because he says he was demoted when he got in the way of the president continuing to hype an unproven cure that he heard about on the Fox News channel. It is one thing to not have leadership at the federal level in response to this crisis. It is actually a whole nother thing to have the president putting American lives at risk every time he blurts something made up or that he thought he understood from TV into the microphone at the White House briefing room. And that really is happening every day. I mean, as a general, I don't have an opinion one way or the other about this president and how he should be treated. I'll lie and say that right here. I'm lying. I'm telling you, I won't tell you my opinion one way or the other about the president and how he should be treated. But as a general matter, I think we should all agree that there perhaps should be a more concerted effort to stop the spread of misinformation about this disease, particularly if it is potentially deadly misinformation. If somebody is repeatedly misinforming the American public about important things having to do with this disease, don't broadcast that. Don't listen to people who are lying to you about this disease. Don't broadcast their comments. Certainly don't keep doing it day after day when they've proven themselves to be lying day after day. And honestly, it doesn't matter who it is. Show some responsibility, honestly.